So welcome everybody, really appreciate you attending to our RSM Australia webinar, Challenges for Victorian Government, RSM Case Studies and Practical Solutions. And as I said, my name's Roger Darville-Stevens. I'm a partner at RSM Australia. I lead our Fraud and Forensic Services team and also lead our Melbourne office government sector group. And next slide, please. Acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and waters on which we live and work. We pay respect to elders past and present as the custodians of their culture and continuous connect to country. Thanks, Aaron. So we've got a great lineup of experts speaking today. We'll kick off shortly with Jared Sayers on artificial intelligence and data analytics. Myself, I'll talk about fraud and forensic control or fraud and corruption control, prevention, detection, response. Warwick and Martin for our audit and assurance area will also speak about preparing for a smooth VAGO audit and addressing common audit issues and accounting challenges that arise. Custard will talk about cyber security, and Satinder and Nicole will talk about probity procurement and integrity. And finishing with a bang with Jamie and Binu, we'll focus on internal audit. We invite you to put any questions you have along the way into the Q&A function of this webinar, and then we'll address those questions at the end. Most of our speakers or joint speakers will speak for approximately 10 minutes and hand over to the next speaker, and then at the end we'll have a Q&A. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Jared Sayers.
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Jared Sayers. I'm a Senior Manager in RSM's AI and Data Analytics practice based in Melbourne. Today I'd like to speak with you about, so more generally, generative AI and more specifically the use of large language models, which is probably the most practical application of generative AI within organizations today. This is some research out of the US that I think was quite relevant and sort of shows where power users are finding value in deploying or using AI within their organizations. Two that we'll focus on specifically today. One is a summarization case study. So we'll look at a government department who has implemented that and ways in which we've used assurance over that system. And one that's close to my heart is around analytics and the use of generative AI or LLMs for analytics. And we're finding there's fantastic benefit and value from using large language models to analyze large volumes of documents, whether they be physical archives or whether they are digitized already. But we're able to access this information in ways which we've never been able to access before. So if you happen to be sitting on a large treasure trove of documents that actually is more of a waste of space than otherwise, you may find now there's actual value that can be untapped from that. I equate this to finding needles in haystacks. It's a really good way or application for doing that. Some applications we see are around customer complaints information. So you might have a lot of emails that aren't really well structured and you can't really get meaning out of that information. Or another application being things like occupational health and safety data. You might have near miss incidents, which can lead to actual loss events and more risky failures in the organization. So some really great use cases there for generative AI. But how do we do it in a safe and responsible way? Because that's a really important aspect of it for meeting our stakeholders' expectations. So Aaron, next slide, please. In Australia, we have existing laws like our privacy laws, our information protection laws, IP, and human rights laws, which obviously these are staples in our society. To help us stay within those laws, we have a set of AI ethics principles, and that helps us with delivering safe, secure, and reliable AI. in our organizations. And some more practical guidance that aligns with that is this voluntary AI safety standard, which was released about 12 months ago. And it provides 10 guardrails to help us understand how we should be implementing or having processes and practices in place around accountability, risk management, data governance, being transparent around the use of AI, and having meaningful ways for people to intervene in the process so that the AI is not in control, but people are in control of it. In line with both of these is a national framework for assurance of AI in government. Now, this is a framework which has been signed up to by all of the states and territories, and is a tool which we've used, and I'll go through the case study in a moment, where we've used this to provide confidence in the AI solutions that are being deployed within departments, within organisations. There's really only one requirement of organisations in Australia at the moment, and that is for non-corporate Commonwealth entities. And it's a policy around that they're required to have an appointed accountable officer and a transparency statement that they publish and they keep updated. Now, although this is at a Commonwealth level, we can expect that other levels of government may adopt the same or similar processes as well. So it's worthwhile keeping that in your sights that may be coming at some stage as well. Thanks, Aaron. So the case study. This is a government department who had used AI, generative AI, large language models for summarising a large volume of survey responses. Now, they wanted to deliver timely results, and so the use of generative AI was a really important use case for them to be able to move quickly. What they did was they used it to summarise the survey responses into themes. They tallied up the number of responses associated with those themes and provided or included a sample of responses relating to those themes. This allowed them to break down that information into a much more digestible format. The way they went about it, they had an in-house developer who created an AI system. He used an open source language model. Now, this is a small language model because we can download it and we can run it on a laptop. The outputs from that AI system were produced to a quality review team who verified the outputs, those summaries, and checked them against the source information to check that they were relevant and representative. We reviewed this system and process against the assurance framework. Just click on that now, Aaron, and it's just come up with another extra bit. The audit approach we took was we looked against the 10 guardrails. We interviewed the developer and the quality leads to understand the process. And we independently tested the same model, the same open source model, against the same prompt that was used. But we created a mock data set that we could test against. And we knew what we expected to receive or get as outputs from that. And we tested the model repeatedly to see whether or not we got reliable, repeatable results from that testing. Separately to that, we independently tested the model for bias. So this is important to consider about how people might be disadvantaged or by particular models and the models that people might select. And we evaluated alternative prompts, alternative models and settings, configuration settings, to see whether or not we could make improvements to this process. Just click on again. The findings from this were, we found that the human reviewers was a really important aspect of having meaningful oversight and intervention within the process, feeding back information to the developer and iterating on the results. The use of the local open source models was an important aspect of this as well, to maintain data security and sovereignty of the information. So no data left the network, no data left the country. And this is a really important aspect from an AI perspective and the use of AI within organizations, particularly government applications of it. Some improvements we found to this and there was inconsistencies in the outputs. So the system wouldn't produce reliable results as we found it. We were able to propose some solutions which helped the solution reduce the hallucination, so making up information that can happen with these models. And we were able to propose solutions that made them 100% repeatable, and we reduced hallucinations to 0 in our testing. And so this was able to give the stakeholders confidence in the AI system that it was producing reliable results. The only thing that we said was a limitation of it was the language model wasn't, this particular generation of language model was not good with numbers, not good with tallying up numbers. So we had to say, look, you can't rely on this information. These numbers that it's generating, they're not reliable. So that was our only really concern from that perspective. The challenge from a government perspective is challenges for government. Managing that value of the speed of processing and the volume of being able to cut through this volume of information, managing that against the risk that it poses. Very important considerations for government departments. Just clicking through, Aaron, next one. So how can you use assurance of AI within your organizations? Well, you can think about it from an organizational context, thinking about who within the organization is ultimately accountable for AI. What's our organizational use across the organization for who's using AI and in for what applications? What are our policies like? If we think about our strategy, are our applications or our use cases in line with our business strategy? And are we getting return on investment for those approaches? If we think about the case study we just talked through, reviewing AI systems and processes, an assurance type of review over that. And similarly, as an inbuilt system, an in-house built system, reviewing that for model testing, configuration, prompts, and outputs, this sort of very tangible, hands-on type of reviews. But if it's a vendor solution, you may not be able to get under the hood as much as you are with an in-house built system. And so you might need to look at the procurement processes, for example, and think about things like, you should always be thinking about data sovereignty and data privacy. If you're deploying solutions such as chatbots, thinking about how do we control what information people are inputting into those models to prevent things like attacks and people going off topic in their discussions with these chatbots, as well as the output. So how do we make sure that these chatbots aren't producing or leaking personal or confidential information that might sit within the knowledge repositories that they're provided with? Clicking through the next one. Thanks, Aaron. So some key audit questions you might consider if you are coming into an AI type of audit, thinking about accountability, the human controls that are in place, thinking about the bias, risk of discrimination and disadvantage, the use of personal information, how it's being used, how it's being disclosed. From a data governance perspective, a bit of a change here is that I guess our data governance has traditionally governed what's in our enterprise systems, our well-defined systems within our organization. It doesn't usually include the documents within our organization. They might be in file repositories or wherever they might be. And so it tends not to be well governed traditionally. So we might need to think about changing the lens from a data governance perspective and what we mean by data governance. Next one. Thanks, Aaron. Yep. So how we can help you is we can help you with prioritizing use cases and thinking about your AI strategy. We can help you navigate the applications of AI and data governance. If you're thinking about those analytical applications of getting information out of those archives, thinking about structuring and gaining insights from that data that might exist within the organization, and also from a frameworks, policy, and standards perspective in applying for responsible and safe use of AI. We can help you with that, and there's an article there. If you follow through that QR code, we'll take you to an article that's we've got relating to that. Thank you, Roger. I'll pass it back to you now.
Thank you so much, Jared. That was awesome. Really appreciate it. So fraud and forensics. Thanks, Aaron. The next slide. I want to take you through a very typical and real case study in Victorian Government, which should resonate with all of you, whether you're state or local government. And this was through an RFQ process. RSM was selected and engaged by this Victorian government entity, their integrity team, to conduct a multi-part fraud and corruption assessment to refresh and update the organisation's fraud and corruption control system or framework. So some of the issues and challenges from their perspective was, and this might resonate with you, that there was a concern related to not knowing what they don't know regarding fraud, corruption and integrity risks, because they hadn't done a refresh of the risk assessment for quite a while. Also, policies, procedures and documented practices had not been reviewed in recent time. So therefore that leaves them slightly exposed to potential updates in legislation that haven't been covered or better practices, which is the next point on upgrading to a better practice benchmark, which was or included the Australian standard AS 8001, which was updated in 2021 on fraud and corruption control. Also, having the updated fraud and corruption control framework live in the culture by awareness training by all employees and its operationalisation of updates. So that's what the organisation wanted. And also the last point was their issues and challenges were ensuring compliance with Victorian Government expectations from the Independent Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Commission, Victorian Auditor General's Office, Department of Treasury and Finance, ministerial directions and onwards. So what we did for the client and cooperatively agreed to from the RFQ was a comprehensive fraud and corruption risk assessment refresh to look at their particular government industry sector type, what fraud and corruption risks are most relevant. Are they represented on the risk register? If not, to refresh that. And of course, look at the controls I make an itinerary and diarise the controls, if you like, or document them. And then a residual risk assessment and leading to potential management action plans for high-rated risks. Benchmark gap analysis against the Australian standard 8001 to identify enhancements or improvement opportunities. Advice on best practice operating model and governance considerations, including a management implementation action plan or roadmap to allow the organisation to continue with those key changes. Revise and enhance each fraud and corruption control relevant policy and procedure, including their public interest disclosure policy procedure. And then we also, at the end of the engagement, conducted 25 interactive on MS Teams fraud and corruption control employee awareness training sessions to over 500 employees, which was a great way to, it's not in person, so it's not labour intensive in that sense. Anyone could dial in once registered into those different sessions, and MS Teams or a similar video conference portal is a great way for interactive learning. Not on this occasion, but on other assignments for clients in the Victorian Government sector, we've done fraud, bribery and corruption employee awareness surveys, because it's a very tangible way to actually reach out to the whole population of employees to ask them different things, including a question of, have you ever been asked or seen anything, asked to do anything improper or seen anything improper? And if the answer is yes, please elaborate. And then if people are willing to give their details to be contacted, we can then follow up with them. Otherwise, it's anonymous. And the information may be enough for the client to then pursue to harden its internal controls environment or conduct an investigation, which we have offered to assist and done on many occasions for Victorian Government. So the solutions, we developed and delivered the scoped suite of services in a phased approach for an operationalisation of their fraud and corruption control system or framework. We did work cooperatively with an enthusiastic and well-versed integrity team. And we always like to share better practices, and clients will say, well, I don't quite understand this, or where have you got this from, or what's better practice in this? We're happy to share that so that the client can then continue on, and it might assist with the expertise they're developing internally. And also, that helps with the continuing implementation of their roadmap going forward. We also assisted with their audit and risk committee questions and answers that they had. Thanks, Aaron. Next slide, please. So I recently wrote an article which is published on our RSM website, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me either on email or phone. You'll see my contact details on the website, or link in with me in LinkedIn. I very regularly post a WTF what the fraud post. There's one client who says to me, he wakes up every morning and is disappointed if there's not a WTF there. Initially, he thought he was being scammed, but then he realised it was my regular update. So we wrote this article on anti-fraud and forensic hacks, just basic tips you can use in your own business immediately. And it does overlap with what I've just discussed with that case study. So it's know your fraud risks. Have a look at your fraud and corruption risk assessment. Has it been updated? Has it been refreshed? If it hasn't for a few years, it's timely to do that. And there will be some changes, modifications and amendments, especially the intelligence you can gather from a lot of the IBAC or Ombudsman Victoria reports that come out on investigations that are great lessons learned for other government entities. Use the existing standards as shortcuts. You know, don't tell anyone, but you don't need a consultant. You can do this yourself if you want, but we often get called to say, we've got the standard, we know what to do, but we just don't have the resources to do it. But use the Australian standard AS8001 2021. There's now a global standard as well, but most, and IBAC, VAGO, DTF, all espouse the Australian standard as a better practice standard. Activate your whistleblower program. So public interest disclosure legislation is your legislation. Fraud is detected by a tip-off or someone having the courage to speak up as a whistleblower or a public interest disclosure in 48% of fraud matters. So, or 48% of fraud is detected that way. So make sure that that program is operating properly, whether that's internally or a mixture of external and internal with your public interest disclosure coordinators, and potentially an outsourced provider, or just checking that it's all activated. People are aware of it, they have confidence in it and can report. If you haven't had a report for many years, I would suggest it's worth a look at, because there's probably some issue why. Watch the red flags. You know, fraud often presents as a combination of smaller behavioural signs, but certainly watch those red flags for, you know, refusal to take leave, because often it's overrepresented in the fraud investigations we do, where people don't take leave because if they do, their fraud will be uncovered. Next slide, please, Aaron. Thank you. So the next few points there is data analytics isn't just for big business. You have a wealth of data that you can tap into, whether it's internally doing that or getting the assistance from someone like RSM and our data analytics team to do that, to see what problems there are, whether it's fraud or error or it's inefficiency that can be improved upon. Conduct periodic screening of employees, especially in high-risk area, as well as suppliers. There's a lot of free, excellent government databases that can be used to check the bona fides of vendors and employees. Embed forensic thinking into your culture. And remember, the behaviour you walk past is the behaviour you endorse. So it's that professional skepticism. And the last one is don't wait until something goes wrong. If you suspect something is not right, whether it's unexplained losses, irregular vendor behaviour, or an overproductive employee, act and have a look and see if you've got that forensic mindset, professional skepticism to then have predication to commence an investigation, whether it's internally run or run independently by someone like ourselves. Thank you, Aaron. Next slide. And I'd like to introduce to you Warwick and Martin to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger. That was fascinating. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Martin Huang, a partner in audit insurance. Joining me in this segment, it's Warwick Sparger, my fellow partner in audit. We will be providing insight on preparing for a smooth VAGO audit. I'll be sharing with highlights to some current accounting issues that's common in the public sector. Next slide, please, Aaron. While the accounting standards are no different, I guess, between sectors, there are unique circumstances in the public sector that can render the arrangement in substance quite different to what it appears in form. The case study here I want to go through, it's about lease assessment from a lessor's perspective. While WSP 16 effectively removed the distinction between finance lease and operating lease for lessees, it remains relevant from a lessor's perspective. The key assessment between the two is whether the lease transfer substantially or the risk and rewards of the underlying assets from the lessor to the lessee. When we assess a recent arrangement, we noted the lessor retains the legal ownerships of the assets. The lease term was only a quarter of the useful life, and the lessor is also responsible for maintenance and obsolescence of the assets. So these factors do not appear to suggest transferring substantially all the risk and rewards and pointing towards an operating lease arrangement. However, when we dive deeper into the arrangement, we noted the lease is really governed by legislations. In fact, the legislations gives the lessee legislative exclusivities and economic controls of the underlying assets. It's a substantive use and with continuity. And the lessee also takes on the operational responsibilities and the risks associated with it. So therefore, in substance, we have actually landed this as a finance lease arrangement. We noted the recognition and presentation between operating lease and finance lease are quite different too. It is more straightforward under the operating lease arrangement, where the assets will continue to be recognized as the relevant PP&E and the lease payments as income. However, more work is required for finance lease. The underlying assets will be removed from their book and replaced with finance lease receivable, commonly calculated using a discounted cash flow model. And the revenue is the interest income from unwinding the finance lease receivable. Just the point I guess want to highlight is really the substance and forms sort of difference in the public sector sense. Next slide, please, Aaron. So it's the second topic, and I want to discuss today is the application of FRD 103 and the recent amendments to WSP 13. Now, in the public sector, the transport and local government sectors are the first to be impacted by these amendments, as they are required by the FRD 103 to conduct full revaluations this year. We have already observed inconsistencies and a lot of implementation challenges in the sectors, and they have indeed resulted in material movements to the PP&E balances and material fair value adjustments to those assets. So one key aspect of this amendment, it added guidance on the application of the cost approach to fair value. Now, given the uniqueness of most public sector assets, cost or replacement cost is often the most commonly used approach to their fair value of these assets. So I want to bring to your attention two of the additional factors out of the many the valuer may need to consider. The first one is site preparation costs. When considering a cost, maybe a building, and with a couple assumptions need to apply. One, we need to take into account the market participants will act in its economic interest. The second, the market participant does not possess the subject assets. Now, the site preparation costs must be included in the cost if they are not already reflected in the fair value of the land. This includes costs required to prepare the land or costs required to remove and dispose of any unwanted existing infrastructures. However, we know demolition costs, the compulsory acquisition costs are to be excluded from the valuation. The second factor on the list there I want to highlight is the disruption costs. So when considering this factor, we are required to step into the shoes of the market participant and what they are obliged to do to minimize the disruptions to services and what are unavoidable. For example, if you are to consider, you will need to consider bus replacement costs or traffic management costs if you are performing work on train tracks or work on roads. So as you can see, these considerations can be quite substantive and are very subjective. So my recommendation in these instances would to start engaging the stakeholders early, and that includes a conversation with your auditors. With this, I'll hand over to Warwick for his tips for a smooth audit.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, I want to provide some tips for a smooth VAGO audit. And a lot of these things are really common sense, and a lot of you are probably doing it anyway. But I suppose my view is the external audit shouldn't be and doesn't need to be adversarial. We are all looking to get to the same destination, and my view is we should be getting there at the same time without many speed humps. So the first thing I would say is engage VAGO early. Particularly the director, because the director is the one who probably has the ultimate say in each portfolio about treatments and any accounting issues and disclosures that are required. So if you can, get in and talk to the director as early as possible. If you're involved in an industry like local government or water or something like that, ensure that the director does come to those meetings regularly to provide a snapshot on the issues across the sector, because the director will be the one who has the visibility on the current issues and views on various issues of accounting issues and in developments within the sector. One of the things we do is particularly, and I think most organisations will do it, but I will emphasise, particularly where there is nowadays remote audits, ensure that there is weekly meetings with the audit team throughout the audit, every week, at least one, maybe two, just to get an update of where the audit's at, how it's progressing, any speed humps and that, so we can get there at the right time. The other thing is to seek opinions on potentially contentious issues from VAGO early, and that would be pre-year end if you can. Anything that arises, any major material transactions, please, I would say, engage them early, particularly the director, about views on those. But what I will say is make sure that you, as the client, have a position to put to VAGO, because I think VAGO does not want to necessarily be the one who does the research and provide you the advice on what you should be doing. I think it's important that you have a research position that you can put to VAGO, how you believe the treatment should be, and they can respond to that. The other thing is make sure you are talking through your relevant portfolio department, that you are getting the developments across the portfolio, because a lot of the new treatments and issues that come through government and the templates from DTF come through the department. So ensure you are also connected there to make sure you are getting those as well. Again, have a pre-year end meeting with VAGO to discuss any issues, any major material transactions that are coming through, in order that the audit can be continued or finished in a smooth way. The other area is skeletal accounts. I know normally there's issues with that, where there are plans and trying to get them out early with the DTF changes to the DTF template. But I will emphasise that using this, and now where there is tier 2 reporting to your advantage, making changes to your accounts early, any disclosures you need, engaging with the auditors early to get them locked into the format of your accounts, so that it minimises disclosure and finicky changes around formatting and that at the end. The other thing that you should be doing is reviewing your notes for materiality, trying to streamline as much as possible your accounts, so that you are basing it on materiality, and that will be your materiality and the importance of yourself and your board you place on each of the disclosures. So making sure you can declutter that there isn't notes that are not needed there early, making sure that these the skeletal accounts do go through the audit committee, so they have full understanding of the accounts or the format of the accounts, and they can have discussions about the level of appetite for streamlining as well. The next one is the audit committee date, and I think you've been setting the audit committee date for the finalisation, having good discussions with the auditors about what's practical about providing clearance at the audit committee, because the last thing you want is to be having a second audit committee, or the closing report doesn't make it, or there's not enough time for proper discussion or research by the members. So have a good chat with the audit committee based on your experience on when it's practical to get to when the audit date should be, that clearance can be made. And then secondly, making sure your timing of your board meeting is practical as well, so that VAGO can provide clearance and that you don't have to re-sign your accounts, because there's nothing worse than having a board meeting and passing the motion to sign the accounts, and then they're signed and then having to go back and redo it again. That just creates a long more time than you need. So making sure there's an agreement on the audit dates as well. The next one is making sure the whole business, not just the finance team and the CFO and the auditors, are involved in the audit process. And one of the things I see that's a good way of doing this is providing a reconciliation to the board and the audit committee and the senior management team between the management accounts, the latest management accounts at 30th of June, and the statutory accounts. So it gives a good understanding about where accounting nuances do impact the financial statements, and also an understanding of what the statutory accounts actually mean compared to what you've been discussing as the management team results. So it does hopefully circumvent any surprises that come out in relation to those as well. The other thing that I see as a good is a page turn outside the formal audit committee with the audit committee members, and opportunity for the board to go through the accounts, where they can ask the so-called understanding questions and not feel embarrassed about asking basic questions, and that also gives them a good understanding and ownership of the accounts at the end. And the last one is ownership of the results, and this goes on from the previous one about the page turn and everything else, but it's also making sure that the board, the audit committee, and the whole senior management team does own the accounts and the result. And it'll be things like also having a comprehensive analysis of your going concern and sustainability, and that there is a proper cash flow analysis. And I know in the public sector, going concern is probably not the major issue because the government does basically underwrite everything, but the sustainability of the business, particularly in the current environment, is very important, and I know auditors do ask for that. So that's probably all the tips I have, but I know a lot of you will be going through an audit at the moment. I hope it's been relatively smooth, probably at the end of the audit, but I wish you all the best. And now I'll pass over to our cyber guru, Gustav.
Thank you, Warwick, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Costa Buzilbar. I'm a director here with RSM Australia Cybersecurity, Resiliency and Data Privacy Practice, and I'll be taking you all through the cybersecurity part of the session so far. And I think we've covered some really interesting topics till late, right? So we've gone through, obviously, artificial intelligence and data analytics to frauds and forensics, going down, obviously, to auditing and from a VAGO management as well. Let's look at why cybersecurity, resiliency, and data privacy become important. Can we go to the next slide, please? And the next slide. Now, as we stand today, at the end of the day, cybersecurity, resiliency, as well as data privacy as function, they're no longer just technical side issues. Where we sit today, especially from the government space, is that these specific issues sit at the very heart of public trust and service delivery within the Victorian Government. Whether it's local councils, the state departments, whether it's universities, what we are seeing is an increasing amount of pressure from various different angles, right? From ransomware to insider threat issues, to supply chain issues, to ongoing state-sponsored attacks on critical infrastructure. And to add to that, obviously, there is a struggle to continue managing existing legacy infrastructure and applications, the pain to migrate legacy applications and utilize that with obviously cloud capabilities, and at the same time, constraints on resources. The reality is that we live today in an environment where a cyber attack can potentially happen within an organization in Australia every 39 seconds. This kind of an attack can potentially bring down critical services, essential capabilities, right from healthcare to education to waste management, effectively disrupting communities, effectively damaging reputations, and eroding the public trust and confidence. And that's why for Victorian government entities, the challenge is not just about preventing these incidents, but essentially about maintaining continuity of operations, maintaining resilience in the face of disruptions, and to be able to respond decisively. But it's not all bad news or really, these issues. There's also some positives for us to take away in the current environment. We're also looking at an existing situation whereby there is a recognition of this challenge and there is a commitment to actually, from the Victorian government, to invest in cybersecurity over the next 3 years to obviously improve and strengthen cyber defenses. These are not just obviously aiming to uplift maturity within government system, but also aiming to align the frameworks with obviously, industry standards, including local standards, like as VPDSS, the essential aids, the ISMs, but also embed resilience in terms of obviously the ongoing operations within the public sector. It is beyond compliance. It is essentially going to be focused on building the future-ready government that can protect citizen data, that can sustain critical services under pressure, and effectively, over the long run, set a benchmark for security and resilience across Australia. What we want to do, effectively working together with you, is to essentially translate those investments into real-world preparedness and help you achieve those measurable outcomes. Let's see how we actually are enabling organizations to do that. Can we go to the next slide, please? Let's start looking at some case studies and look at the challenges that we actually have helped solve in the last couple of years. So this one was focused on an extremely critical state department within Australia, specifically in the financial services sector, where there was an extreme concern in terms of the budgeting application. A legacy application being part of the system for a large number of years also had dependencies with external contractors, external service providers servicing it, lack of awareness internally in terms of end-to-end visibility of data flow, lack of awareness in terms of end-to-end incident management requirements, especially if something does go wrong during critical time periods of budgeting in the year. And more importantly, lack of confidence with the senior stakeholders in terms of capability to recover critical operations in case of actual incident, whether it's infrastructure, application, or a cyber incident. What we did today, effectively working together extremely closely with the key stakeholders that were nominated from this particular department, is to put together and work in a collaborative approach in a phase-wise manner. Right from a discovery phase for us to essentially understand and put together a gap assessment, essentially giving a view as to what is the current state practical view of the gaps from a people, process, and technology perspective, what kind of practical recommendations are important for us to implement from a control perspective, and what are the changes and improvement maturities needed to go from the current state to the target state. That followed up with obviously doing an end-to-end comprehensive business impact analysis, obviously with the business teams as well as with the technology teams, along with mapping the processes and understanding our upstream and downstream dependencies from an application perspective, including working together with some external stakeholders who were involved as part of the engagement. Obviously, that helped us drive down to the critical recovery parameters, develop the appropriate documentation from not only the disaster recovery perspective, but the business continuity, as well as cybersecurity incident response perspective with dedicated playbooks and plans. And at the end of the day, conduct comprehensive testing, not only from an infrastructure perspective, but also from specific scenarios that were deemed appropriate and critical from a risk management perspective for the department. Test it with the executives, test it with the third parties, test it with the operational teams to really give a confidence back to the team that yes, we can recover capabilities and we can continue even if it is during critical budgeting time period. Let's look at the next one. Can we change the slide, please? Yeah. So this is for one of the large government councils that we worked together, essentially focusing on uplifting their capabilities from an end-to-end resilience perspective. Again, this council had gone through a range of different critical issues which had impacted their critical operations and services, especially towards the citizens of the community. They had gone through a number of infrastructure problems, some resourcing changes, including obviously structural organization changes, which had really, again, dented the confidence within the management team to be able to continue operations in case there is either a small or a large scale incident. Similar to the previous case, we again worked extremely closely with the nominated stakeholders within the council across business and technology and third-party teams, starting with a discovery approach to understand what are the critical capabilities, what are the critical requirements from that perspective, what are specific needs from a recovery perspective, what are the dependencies, mapping them from a process perspective, even going down to the range of whiteboarding them, to really developing plans, procedures, and playbooks which are relevant, timely, and most importantly, practical based upon the organization's, in this case, the council's risk management framework. In the end, again, we developed specific focus scenarios which were deemed relevant for the council based upon previous incidents that had happened to actually test them out this time differently and see how councils act and how the council could actually react based upon plans that were developed now and plans that were ready to actually implement, and again see the comprehensiveness in terms of their capability to respond and readiness to be able to manage any critical incident. Can we go to the next slide, please? The next one is again focused on the education sector, where we have been working together for a number of years now on a leading university in Australia, focusing on helping them uplift their cybersecurity and maturity. In this case, this particular university has been on a journey, essentially going through uplifting the capabilities, aligning to industry standards, but at the same time, obviously improving its organizational strategies and approach towards managing cyber risk, managing critical student data, obviously ensuring data privacy of critical research that has been done, and ensuring compliance to the relevant requirements as well. Again, they chose an extremely complex framework, in fact, more than one, 853, as well as the cybersecurity framework, to essentially align their capabilities internally. Again, we took a multi-phased approach to essentially do an analysis and understand what the critical gaps were, develop, prioritize critical roadmap, going down from quick wins to obviously long-term wins for the organization, help them implement that over a period of time, but also review their strategy from a cybersecurity perspective, align and understand their gaps from a perspective of overall organizational strategy and their key targets, and help them actually improve and mature that. And we have seen that improvements come across a range of ways, with reduced number of risks, with reduced number of incidents, with much more improved time to recover, time to manage incidents, and overall improved maturity across security operations over the last 3 years, which is a great positive win for us to take away. Finally, as we essentially start going to the next step, can we go to the next steps? Next slide, please. What do we have as a call to action? What do we do essentially, right? As we start going through the various details, I do want to leave with one very clear message. In the world that we stand today, cyber incidents are always going to be the inevitable as to the matter of when. What really sets critical, resilient entities apart is not just how they respond to incident, but how well they prepare, how quickly they recover, and how confidently they are able to continue serving their communities. The government's commitment to obviously invest in this particular space over the next 3 years is already a vital step in the right direction. But what the real value will come across is how effectively each department, each council, each organization, each educational institute embeds these practices into everyday operations, tests continuity planning, and obviously ensures stronger governance. This is exactly where we can actually help you with our experience and expertise essentially in this space, right from obviously uplifting your capabilities to align to the right set of frameworks, designing and testing plans, playbooks, and procedures, to essentially strengthening your supply chain and third-party risk management, to obviously ensuring ongoing awareness from an ongoing operation perspective. At the end of the day, it is beyond technology, right? It is essentially about safeguarding critical services, protecting citizen data, and for us to work together to enforce and reinforce public trust. Together with that particular right planning, execution, we can actually set that benchmark and work together to help you achieve that goal. With that, I will hand it over to our next speakers who are going to focus on the critical aspect of probity, Satinder and Nicole. Thank you.
Thanks, Costa. Nicole and myself will give you a couple of cases in respect to probity procurement and integrity services. Next slide, please. But first of all, you may ask, why have probity? Now, probity is all about a good process in procurement. It provides accountability, it ensures interests of respondents are protected, and preserves the public and respondent confidence in the process. In essence, it provides a defensible outcome. Now, effective probity management is concerned with policies, procedures, processes, and systems rather than the outcome of the activity, undertaking, or the project. However, despite good management of probity risks, mistakes and disputes can arise. Similarly, even the best probity processes do not guarantee that a project or activity will be immune from problems or criticism. In essence, probity supports the achievement of a successful procurement outcome. Now, we'll just go through a couple of case studies. The first one is in respect to a personal conflict of interest. We were engaged to provide probity oversight for a major procurement. During the early stages, a potential conflict of interest was declared by the CEO, whose son was employed by one of the respondent organizations. Now, the issue and challenges were there is a reputational and procedural risk which had to be managed. Due to the skills of the CEO, we could not remove the CEO from the process, and he held a senior role in the evaluation process. So some of the procedures which were performed, formal COI management plan was developed. The CEO roles were limited to panel membership and chairing duties reassigned to an executive director. The CEO was required to reiterate the conflict declaration at all senior evaluation executive meetings. He was also requested to provide regular assertions, and we established a requirement for immediate notification for any changes. Some of the solutions, we delivered a structured and conflict management approach that upheld the probity principles of independence, transparency. We ensured a defensibility of the evaluation process, maintained stakeholder confidence by embedding governance safeguards, and finally enabled continued participation of the CEO in a controlled and compliant manner. The next case study is about the revolving door. In this case, during the live tender phase, concerns emerged regarding the movement of a state employee to a tendering organization. Now, this does happen. So what the issues were, the timing of the employment transition raised significant risk around perceived and actual conflicts of interest. The departing employee had access to commercially sensitive information and relationships that could advantage the tenderer. Without appropriate controls, this situation could undermine stakeholder confidence and defensibility of the procurement outcome. So some of the procedures which we performed included, we reviewed the employee's role, access, and influence on the procurement process, recommended restrictions in the employee's involvement in procurement-related activities prior to their departure, advised on formal notification to relevant stakeholders, and we also sought written confirmation from the tendering organization that the former state employee would be excluded from any involvement in the tender response, evaluation, or related communications. And we did provide a reminder to the employee of the confidentiality obligations prior to departure. So the solution supported the client to respond swiftly and transparently to a sensitive probity risk. We embedded procedural safeguards that upheld the principles of independence, transparency, and fairness. We maintained the integrity and defensibility of the procurement process. And finally, we reinforced public confidence by aligning actions with recognized best practice and government policy. I'll now hand over to Nicole. Thanks.
Thank you, Satinder, and welcome everyone. As Satinder just mentioned, my name is Nicole Kennedy. I'm the Manager, Probity Procurement and Integrity Services here at RSM. And I'm going to go through two case studies this afternoon, and that's going to focus on procurement services. RSM was engaged with a top-ranked university to support and uplift its procurement governance and probity framework, with a focus on enhancing integrity, transparency, and strategic alignment across its capital and operational procurement activities. The university was concerned regarding its current state of practices. It was a hybrid model where there was strategic and high volume procurement activities through a centralised location, whilst its routine and low value purchases were managed by individual departments. Their policies, procedures and documents hadn't been reviewed in some time, so they were unsure whether they were aligned with best practices. They wanted to design its procurement practices to ensure it did align with the best practice, wanted to allow for consistency across the procurement categories, and ensure all the procurement activity was defensible and transparent in all procurement processes. There was also a very strong appetite to allow their artefacts and tools to become to a mature level to ensure it supported all procurement departments through a full end-to-end procurement process. So what RSM undertook was a review of their current policies and procedures and frameworks to gain a clear understanding of what the current landscape was, and also identify any gaps or deficiencies that may exist that was causing the department some challenges. We met with some of the key stakeholders to understand and assess their current procurement practices, their understanding, and also their challenges that they were facing on a day-to-day basis. We wanted to look at developing an overarching procurement probity framework policy, incorporating industry best practices and compliance requirements. We also developed templates, tools and guidelines to ensure that there was a successful implementation throughout uplifting their existing materials. So the solution was a fit-for-purpose procurement guideline that is scalable, defensible, and aligned with the university's strategic objectives. A probity guidance document that reinforces ethical conduct and compliance across the procurement activities, and created a suite of artefacts to support the procurement professionals within the university. Next slide, please, Aaron. This other one was to work with a government construction project, and this was providing procurement consulting services. The scale of the project was quite large, and it had a reputational and conflict risk due to local interest of the project. The procurement was operating under a very tight schedule and also required agile and responsive procurement support. The client wanted to ensure that there was a defensible and recognised best practice throughout the process. The client also required services from an independent consultant that understood procurement and probity best practice. The services that RSM provided to the government was we worked closely with the procurement team, the project sponsor, to assess existing evaluation procedures and implemented targeted improvements to strengthen governance and defensibility of the process. We developed a detailed evaluation plan. We chaired the evaluation plan, ensured that we're an independent facilitator across the sessions, and we drafted comprehensive evaluation report that reflected the entire process from end to end to make sure that there was a defensible and a transparent manner. So the solution to our client was we delivered procurement services in a phased and responsive manner aligned with the project schedules. Again, there was some very tight timelines through the project. We provided strategic guidance on managing procurement in a risk dynamic environment, supported the client to achieve value for money compliance and stakeholder confidence, and ensure that the evaluation plan process was defensible and aligned with the recognised best practice in government. So thank you. I know I might have been a bit short there. I was just very conscious of time. So now I'm going to hand over to Bino and Jamie for the last part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Binu Fernando. I'm a partner in RSM's Risk Advisory Services, and I'm joined by my fellow partner, Jamie Lamb, and we'll run you through another very important aspect of assurance. We heard previously from Warwick and Martin covering off on external audit, and now we shift the focus a little bit to internal audit, which is another very critical pillar of embedding a strong 3 lines model within your organisation. So today I'd like to run you through the benefits you can gain from moving your internal audit function from a fully in-house function to either a co-sourced or fully outsourced one. And then Jamie will run you through a current case study with a government sector client. So the co-sourced versus outsourced conversation has become more and more relevant across not just government, but many other industries. And this emanates from the various regulatory obligations organisations are now subject to, as well as the ever-evolving challenges in areas such as cyber threats and meeting things like ESG and sustainability requirements, and adapting to the everyday use of AI to ensuring things like your, across changes such as those in the work and health safety space with psychosocial hazards coming into play. So with those few examples alone, you can see that more and more organisations are required to be across a lot of specialist areas. And with the resource and cost constraints, this is next to impossible for most organisations to achieve in-house. Therefore, one of the best ways to access this knowledge and expertise is through co-sourcing or outsourcing. So on to co-sourcing first. What co-sourcing allows you is access to specialised expertise. So it brings in external specialists such as IT, cybersecurity, ESG specialists to supplement your internal capabilities of your in-house team. Which means it helps you handle any complex or niche audits without having to hire full-time staff. It also provides knowledge transfer and capability building. Internal audit team in-house can learn from the external experts, and it enhances your own skills and methodologies. And it also builds long-term internal audit capacity, which provides you the flexibility and scalability. It's easy to scale up or down based on the audit plan or any sudden regulatory or operational needs within your organisation. And you retain your in-house internal auditors who understand your organisation's culture and history and processes, but you can also choose to co-source when you need to, whether it's a high-risk area or some operational issue that crops up that requires that specialist knowledge. Having an ongoing co-source arrangement also means that you reduce ramp-up time for audits, and you can tap in very swiftly to specialist skills that your in-house team may not have. Enhanced collaboration, is probably the best way to work in this sort of scenario is with enhanced collaboration. It does encourage teamwork between the internal in-house team as well as the external experts, and the knowledge transfer goes both ways. And it combines the agility and objectivity of the external team with the internal insights of your in-house team. Moving on to the fully outsourced option. So fully outsourced option offers you full external objectivity. It eliminates any potential for internal bias, and the auditors are completely independent from company operations. And this is a very, very critical factor, particularly for government, and a big benefit in the fully outsourced model. There is a cost-saving element. There's no need for full-time internal audit staff. So salary costs related to salaries, training, all of those things reduce internally. And this sort of model is especially useful for smaller or mid-sized firms, with budgetary restraints as well. Chances are, with the amount of, salary costs that you would pay for a couple of internal auditors in-house, you would be having access to a full team with specialists in various areas as your fully outsourced audit function through an audit provider firm. It therefore gives you access to a broader talent pool, so access to top talent and resources across a range of areas from cybersecurity to AI to business continuity, some of which you've heard earlier today. And typically the teams will be dealing with other similar clients and have real-time access to emerging themes in that particular industry. And it also gives you cross-sectional visibility on better practices amongst your peers, and this enhances the quality of audit recommendations the firms are able to provide you, and it gives you a really strong sense of where you are, where your processes and controls may sit relative to peers. And of course, with a large firm that may have global connections, such as RSM, you will have access to a broad range of global resources and multi-industry exposure as well. Outsourcing provides you a full sort of turnkey solution because your outsource provider handles everything collaboratively, of course, from planning, execution to reporting through really well set up systems, progress tracking tools and methodologies. And, again, very, very ideal for organisations with limited internal audit infrastructure. So both arrangements, in conclusion, have benefits. The key is to find an internal audit provider that works on the ethos of partnering with your organisation so that they embed themselves within the operating rhythm of the organisation. They get to know your strategy, direction, operational challenges, and also is able to build strong relationships with key stakeholders, including, of course, the CEO, chair of the audit committee, and also share open dialogue with other key stakeholders, such as your external auditor. This minimises that fear of, if we outsource or core-source, would we actually lose internal knowledge? It's really about how you manage that relationship and find the right provider who is a partner to you in terms of risk management and embedding the 3 lines of defence. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Jamie, who'll run you through a case study to demonstrate this.
Thank you, Binu, for your insights to the type of internal audit arrangements and the benefits of having, an outsourced or co-sourced internal audit provider itself. Look, my name is Jamie Lam. I'm a partner within the risk advisory space at RSM. We should now bring this to light with a live example of a case study. In this instance, RSM actually worked as an outsourced service provider to a Victorian Government agency itself. In addition, this organization has done a lot of work around the risk management space. And within our internal audits, we noted that there is a good culture of identifying risks and controls and also reporting and escalating them. So as part of this partnership and also with the standing direction requirements, we prepared a 3-year internal audit rolling plan itself. The plan is a risk-based plan. So what we mean by risk-based is that it's targeting the areas that matters to the organization. The internal audits are linked to the strategic risk. We considered the current risk as well as the emerging risk itself. The second thing is we also considered the other assurance that is given to the organization by other service providers. Look, the last thing we wanted was to duplicate effort. It's a waste of resource and time for the business itself. So that particular organization actually had an external party doing pen tests. So we ensured that we didn't duplicate effort in that sense. The third area is that this document, the internal audit plan, is a dynamic document itself. We look at this plan at least on a monthly basis with our client. Look, we do coffee catch-ups. I think that's the most effective way of having a good discussion and a frank discussion. We ensured that the plan was fit for purpose at all times. The audits are prioritized according to what gives the organization most assurance as well as most value. Look, through our part. Look, so this the first thing is having that plan in place and where we can add value. So the question is how did we actually do it? So the first thing is we actually, through our planning cycle itself, we ensured that we asked the right questions when we did the scopings. So the key questions are like, why are we doing this audit? And what do we want to achieve out of this audit? The second thing is, what are the risks are we trying to cover? And what are the relevant controls within the risk register that we should be looking at? The third question is, what are your pain points? And, what can we have a deeper dive in? We always like to think about data as well. Like, what data sets do you have in this particular area? And what are the trends or hotspots that we need to be aware of using the data that we can analyze on? Last but not least, we also ask the question around what are the opportunities that we can explore in this particular audit. We then ensured that we tailored our internal audit approach to answer some of these key questions. So when you think about, if people ask the question of value add, what value add internal audit can do? One of the key things that internal audit can do, particularly for this example, is actually linking risk management to internal audit. It is important to make sure that we are on that same journey with the organization. So the outcome of this particular audit was that we actually identified opportunities to remove inefficiencies. We were able to share lessons learned on what we seen in another organization for this particular audit, to say, look, we have seen this happen elsewhere, and this is the solution set. We might be able to tailor so that you can remove some of these duplicate processes that you have. The other thing that we did was, because we had a very good solid data set on some of the activities that's happening in the organizations, we actually got our data analytics team to build a dashboard to use that data set to give management the power and the tools to have a deeper dive on where things are at any point in time. The most important bit was actually linking risk management to internal audit. What we've done as part of this audit, we actually provided suggestions to say, hey, there are some controls that are not really controls in your risk register, and some of the controls within the risk register can be reworded to be controls. As part of this audit, because the team had a deeper dive into the processes as well as the control environment, we actually provided suggestions to say, hey, this is a good control that should be incorporated into your risk register itself. It might be something that management should be using these controls as part of your first line of defense. The third was that the outcome of the audit actually provided clarity for management as to the assessment of the residual risk. So there is always that inherent risk and then the residual risk post controls. But how does management actually assess that is actually effective, the residual, the controls to manage the risk itself? With internal audit, this is where management can put hand on heart to say, look, these are the controls we have. Internal audit looked at these controls and they were comfortable that it was operating effective, hence the residual risk rating of low for this matter. But what's in it for the audit and risk committee is that they were able to get comfort that the risks are managed appropriately, and the risk reported to them in terms of the tolerance level is accurate. So this is the value add that one internal audit engagement gave to this particular agency itself. Before I end off with this case study, I just want to leave you with 3 thoughts on how internal audit can actually add value to the organization, particularly when you partner with a third party such as RSM. The first is, think about your current risk management journey. How can internal audit help you? How can internal audit share insights to what has happened in other organizations that can help you strengthen and continuously improve on your risk management journey? Second is, how are you actually linking risk management to internal audit itself? You should be using or thinking about using internal audit as tool to help you embed risk management into the organization and raise awareness of risks and controls. But last but not least, government in Victorian government, we know that funding is continuously being reduced, which means that, well, you've got lesser and lesser resources to manage your existing BAU as well as risk. But when we think about risk, people always see it in a negative light. It is important to think about what are the opportunities that you can undertake to actually help improve processes or improve the top line for that matter. So with this, I'll end the presentation and I'll hand it over back to Roger, who would go into the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Binu and Jamie. 2 slides, very concise. I love that. And I feel a little bit guilty because everyone's stuck basically to their 10 minutes. So I feel like I've been a bit dictatorial. Apologies if you didn't have more latitude, but awesome content. So what I'd like to do is go to Q&A. Feel free to put any questions you'd like in the Q&A tab at the moment in the webinar. What I wouldn't mind doing, and Jared and Custub, just a notice here, that I wouldn't mind going through 2 questions that Jared and Custub have answered in the chat individually to the people who have asked the questions, but others may be interested. So Jared, are you still around? And Custub?
Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent.
Thanks.
So Jared, yours was, is the framework also covered quantum safe artificial intelligence to ensure the artificial intelligence will survive in a post-quantum world. Based on your experience, what will be the biggest challenge for an organisation to be prepared for this new transformation, especially when there are competing demands to meet other strategy goals such as sustainability? Your answer is to solve the world for AI right now. Go, Jared.
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, so quantum computing, obviously, it is coming. Yes, I can appreciate that it is a threat. It is a little bit of a future threat still at the moment, but it is coming to a nearer term consideration, and it is going to be a challenge because quantum computing, and this is probably it could even be a question for Gustav, who might add his perspective to this. The threat really comes from the threat to break encryption algorithms very quickly, and that poses a risk to privacy, releasing privacy information and confidential information from organizations, just because the security could be vulnerable under those environments. That said, in the context of AI, I guess there's applications, and we don't even know. I think there's so much unknowns in terms of what quantum computing will do and what it will do in terms of supercharging AI and AI's capability as well. I think the frameworks are more general in nature. So they talk about provide you a framework, provide you guidance around how to go about doing it in a safe, responsible way. It's not prescriptive. They're not prescriptive around how to protect from such threats as these, but gives you good guidance in terms of how to direct your energies. In terms of competing goals and strategies, particularly around sustainability as well, I think probably quantum wouldn't be the top of my list in terms of the priorities. I think it depends on the application as well. So not all applications of AI are external facing that might face an external threat, such as from quantum attacks. But if it is in more internal use cases, thinking about the opportunity, focusing on the opportunity of what can be realized, I'm sure that there are a lot of other considerations that need to come in potentially for the use cases that most people are putting in place in their organizations. But certainly if you are going external, those sorts of threats are something that you would want to have on your radar. From a sustainability point of view, my perspective is that these small language models, as we talked about through the case study I talked through, is a really good example of how you can use appropriately sized models to do the work that you need to do. So a lot of what you'll get in the platforms that are available use very high-powered models. Not all applications require a high-powered model. Now, a high-powered model will require more energy, it will require more resources to use. A small language model, for example, won't require that. And if you've got a smaller problem that you want to work through a lot of data, but with a very simple request, a small language model may do the job. And even the small language models are doing a very good job relative to those larger models as well. So they're worthwhile investigating and understanding whether or not those are suitable for your purpose. And it may well be that you can get the security benefits, the privacy benefits that I mentioned as well, together with also reducing the footprint. So that's all said to that.
Thank you so much, Jared. Gustav, your question, as well as Jared's asked you to continue on also, but is the recommendations and assistance that RSM provides aligned with ASD, Australian Signals Directorate, and ACSC, Australian Cyber Security Centre guidelines? We always action what ASD and ACSC recommends to us and want to make sure that there is no rework due to non-alignment. Thanks. Gustav.
Thank you, Roger. And I think it's a very relevant question as well, because one key area of consistent reference that obviously organizations and entities in this sector must be looking out for is obviously the guidance from ASD and ACSC, which is also continuously evolving. And that's not just limited to the IT sector, but also to the operational technology sector, which is relevant from a critical infrastructure perspective. The good part is obviously we align very closely to that as well, and any recommendations that we provide as part of either assessments, reviews, or audits are essentially aligned to make sure that the entity is able to align to the recommendation explicitly that SD and SC asked you to. So the recommendations will take into account the practical context, what is important for the appropriate entity, make sure that we understand the existing levels of maturities, including current state and target state, and then appropriately give recommendations, as I mentioned, in a prioritized roadmap where needed be, based upon what needs to be implemented as well. But yes, it absolutely does align to ASD ACSC. At the same time, we also see examples of organizations as well as entities which are looking for wider alignment based upon their operations to practices and frameworks and standards such as ISO 27001 for the information security management systems, 22301 when it comes down to the business continuity systems, and obviously to the wider international standard, which is the NIST cybersecurity framework. To elaborate further as well, in fact, one of the examples that I'd given for the university, we actually started in the first year with respect to making sure with the recommendations as well as any further directions from a priority roadmap is actually aligned to NIST cybersecurity framework version 1.1, which was relevant at that point in time. And as that framework evolved to 2.0 over the last year or so, we have obviously evolved with subsequent audits to actually change or manage the audit as well as manage the reviews as well as manage the recommendations to the revised requirements from the standard perspective as well. So we take that into consideration as well. And to add to that, what obviously Gerard mentioned as well, at the end of the day, technology is progressing fast. We're seeing the landscape changing very fast as well. So from that perspective, I think I definitely agree with what Gerard's mentioned too. We do see organizations taking a much more balanced approach going forward. But again, it all comes down to taking into consideration the existing context and maturities, including current and target states where they intend to be. So I'll hand it back to you, Roger.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. So we don't have any further questions. So last opportunity to put any questions in the Q&A, otherwise we'll finish up. I thank on behalf of RSM Australia and our webinar registrants, our speakers today. Also, I'd like to acknowledge my PA, Crystal, and also marketing with Aaron and Allegra for their excellent work in helping us put this together. I hope you found value out of today. We appreciate the opportunity to present this free webinar, and we will follow up with an email and give you a copy of the slides, etc. Anyhow, and the opportunity to contact us for any of those topics if you want to just have a coffee that we each shout ourselves, or a phone call or a video conference or similar. Thank you and have a great day.